Today is January the 18th, 2021, and my colleagues Ernie Arvai and Michelle Merlozo have joined me. We're going to have a little presentation and a conversation with our audience about the survey we did at the end of the year called Outlook 2021. And gentlemen, should we start with the presentation, or do either of you have any comments you want to share on how you see the year playing out?
I think first, we'd like to thank the participants in our survey panel. A good portion of them, I think 52%, were either C-suite or senior executives for taking the time to participate with us in gathering information on their outlook for 2021. So we appreciate their participation and look forward to future surveys as well with this group. With that out of the way, I think we can talk a little bit about the overall results in general. One of which that we've got some pessimism in the industry today, given the global pandemic, expectations for revenue, some key risks and other factors, and we can talk about those individually as we go through the process. Michelle, would you like to take us through the first couple of results?
Sure, Ernie, absolutely. And I second your thanks to the audience, to the participants of the survey. Their detailed response were instrumental in generating what I view as very solid and very relevant data. So, we had a few notes and also some commentary at AIR on the state of the economy, but what this slide generally shows and confirm, I would say, for all those that are closely following the state of the economy since the beginning of the pandemic in particular, we see that the general sentiment is fairly positive with respects to the Chinese economy. I mean, the vast majority of the respondents view the Chinese economy as the engine of recovery to a degree. There's a little bit more of a split in opinion when it comes to the US economy. And I think there's still some level of uncertainty about what President-elect Biden will be able to pull through Congress in terms of stimulus package. And that might have a considerable effect on whether we are at a 3 to 4, 5% GDP growth rate in 2021, or we navigate around the 2 to 3%. So I think it might be early days for the US GDP confirmation, but in any case, it's struggling behind the Chinese GDP. For Europe, I think there is a general sentiment that the European economy is in a tight situation because of structural issues and also because of anemic growth rates and serious issues in a few of the countries, namely Italy, perhaps even France, and Southern Europe as a whole. Ernie, anything to add?
I just thought that it was interesting that the outlook for the rest of the world was actually slightly better than the outlook for the Eurozone, which indicates how serious some of the problems facing the Eurozone are, and the uncertainty of what happens with Brexit and the lack of real certainty on the trade agreement and how that will work out is still to be determined.
I think we're not done yet with all the politics associated with Brexit and Brussels. If they don't validate that trade agreement with the UK, will probably plunge the UK economy in a deeper than expected recession.
It's interesting when you bring that up, that even without COVID, this European situation is bad. When you throw the pandemic on top of that, it just magnifies everything.
Well, Europe's struggling with many issues beyond their economy and the ability to create jobs and have the flexibility to create, what I call sustainable job. France in particular is a is in a very tight spot. Macron's reforms have probably pointed the country in the right direction, but the pace of transformation, of change there is snail-like pace, not to make a joke, but it is concerning to me that the French job market has not been able to reform itself sufficiently.
Okay, so let's go to the next chart here, which I think is really, really interesting. A lot of red.
A lot of red, yes. Ernie, I'll let you go on this one.
Yeah, this chart basically indicates a forecast for the revenues of each of the participants' company that they're expecting for 2021 compared to 2019. And the number one response here was 32% thought that the revenues would be under 70% of 2019 levels, which is a pretty severe drop. So continued problems from the pandemic are clear throughout the industry. The number two was the 15% drop of the 70 to 80% revenue. So the really 47% of the participants experienced a severe drop of at least 20%. You add the 80 to 90s and get up to 100, and it's pretty much 67% versus 33% that positive. So 2/3 negative, 1/3 positive, essentially, in the outlook for revenues in the future. And if we look at it by a mix of the types of companies, the supply chain and the OEMs are much worse than the participants who are from the consultancy, analytics, and financial side of the house. So in terms of the industry, the core industry itself and manufacturing, it's almost all on the negative side.
I mean, this is a very concerning chart, because what it shows fundamentally is that we tend to think in terms of calendar year, or we can wipe it, we can just turn the page, and no. The lingering effect of the pandemic, especially the demand, the production of commercial aircraft, is going to have a lingering effect for the next 2 to 4 years on the supply chain. So we're going to crawl out of this pandemic hole very, very slowly. In the same time, there's going to be a considerable, and there has been a considerable adjustment taking place, especially in terms of revenue and workforce, that will prolong itself into 2021 for sure.
In this chart, we asked respondents to indicate their top concern from a series of risks, and these were risks involving government. And the top two in this result were the unpredictability of government shutdowns, the COVID lockdowns, and a lack of regulatory standards for international travel, or at least a set of consistent standards for international travel to permit the borders to be reopened and flights to resume. So those two represented the vast majority of the respondents, with regulatory compliance burdens, tariffs, and lack of government support for small business coming in third, fourth, and fifth of the responses. But I think the unpredictability is really something that has impacted the industry in a difficult way, as we don't know what's coming next, and we don't know what's right around the corner. So it's difficult to plan for. You just keep going as best as you can in this environment, and that's tough for a lot of companies who are facing cash flow crises from the lack of sales. With a lack of revenues, it's very, very difficult. So that tends to be problematic.
Yeah, and I think, if you combine the anxiety that is really present in SMEs in particular, you sense frustration, and to a degree you sense some anger, and we could lead that conversation into the overall situation in the United States in particular. But what really is concerning to me is that there hasn't been an entity that has engaged, worldwide global leadership and says, okay, what it is that we're going to need in order for international travel, for domestic travel to resume to a normal, to some level of normalcy. Sorry. Here we've seen in the past 3 to 4 weeks, and I understand that these decisions are motivated by the emergence of new strains of the virus, and they tend to be a little bit reactive, but also some level of proactivity based on medical data. But it's going to be very evident that the lack of engagement of government with the industry, with the travel industry, with the airline industry is going to remain a top concern for us as we go deeper into 2021. And that in order for the industry to recover, a set of rules, a set of, this is what we need, is going to need to be defined sooner rather than later. Especially with regards to testing and vaccination and standards and this and that. You can't afford surprises in a sector that has basically been decimated for good reasons and with some very traumatic and negative effect, of course.
All right, let's look at the next one.
In this chart, we asked about the top concerns from a macroeconomic risks segment, and here obviously the continuation of the pandemic dominated the results with 82% of respondents. Societal disruptions came up to 11%, which is probably a bit higher than I thought might happen. Geopolitical at 4%, and then risks of trade wars were a bit lower than I thought at 1% each. So the respondents were clearly in a different place than some of my thinking on the issues. And this result is quite interesting. But clearly the pandemic is the driving force behind what's happening to our industry and the harm that's been done. And since March of last year, we've seen an industry plummet and recover very, very slowly. For those who see our morning call and our AirInsight Airline Performance Index for the U.S., we're sort of stuck in the 50% level, and still down quite a bit more, a little bit more than that in traffic. So it's a tough recovery over the long term. And that recovery,
I think, Ernie, I think people would love to trade or risk a trade war instead of the continuation of the pandemic. When you look at this chart, we're at 1%, but obviously pandemic is the focus of the concern. Geopolitical disruptions really fundamentally will come back to later. There's never been a crisis the likes we've experienced that has not led us to some level of geopolitical disruption. So that's in the oven right now. Societal disruptions. I mean, do you agree that what we've seen in the U.S., what we're seeing in some parts of Europe, in Germany, and to a degree in Australia as well, is the beginning of social disruptions that are connected to the politics of the pandemic, but also to economic issues that are going to worsen for a lot of people, especially at the SME level. That's my concern there.
I would agree. I think we'll see some of those smaller, as the pandemic wanes, we'll see those other issues gaining in strength. And I think some of the festering issues there in terms of trade and societal and geopolitical disruptions will definitely return to the forefront.
But what does Biden do? That's the real question that I have here. Okay, Biden wants to rebuild the relationship with what we call traditional allies. So a trade war with EU cannot be something he pursues aggressively at the risk of further alienating Europe there's a little bit of romanticism associated with, Biden, the Democrats, and Europe. Traditionally, the Europeans view a Democrat president as more aligned with their ideology, their thinking, their quote unquote lifestyles. Is that a guarantee of appeasement? Is that a guarantee that we're going to see a better relation with the EU? The past 12 years, I would say rather 8 years, have seen, I think, a moment of reckoning between the relation between the European Union and the United States. Under President Obama, things were not all that well. Remember the NSA scandals and this and that, where a major issue was European powers. Under President Trump, it got worse, more on the trade and on the diplomatic side. So I think President Biden is going to have to make some really hard choices in order to rebuild bridges and especially not further alienate the European Union.
Yes, I would tend to agree. And the question is, how strong will the Biden administration be given the divide in the country? And can they really force their agenda on the country, given the splits, the domestic violence, and the clear divide between the Republicans and the Democrats and the right and the left? So it's going to be interesting to watch what can happen in Congress, and whether the tie in the Senate will require a lot of tiebreakers by the new vice president.
Well, the domestic and the foreign policy agenda are going to be clearly driven by different individuals, and I don't expect a divergence between the parties necessarily on the foreign policy. I think it's going to be fairly consistent. You'll have a lesser of a in the middle split, but on the domestic agenda, I mean, obviously you're right. I mean, it's going to be 2 years of probably unproductive blabbering in Congress.
All right. To prevent us blabbering, here's the next one.
In looking at the market risks, clearly the key issue is the speed of economic recovery, with 62% concerned about how fast we recover from COVID. Airline failures were brought up by 16%, and declining demand for new aircraft by 14% as key issues. And I think those were both important to the OEMs and the supply chain as well. But the shape of the economic recovery, I think, is a key issue, and we'll talk more about that later, specifically segment by segment, as we went into more detail during our survey. But really, the speed of the recovery is the critical concern right now for most industry players, and I think for most of us, both personally and professionally.
And the only thing I want to mention here is the risk of airline failures. I mean, if you see in the US and Canada, and to a lesser extent in Europe, if you see the ideological thinkers flight shaming, finger pointing travelers who dare flying to sunnier destination, I understand this may not be perceived as responsible. I understand that. But decisions and the finger pointing have consequences for the industry. We've seen in Canada, WestJet and Air Canada have laid off a lot of their employees recently in response to the Trudeau decision for mandatory testing. I think we're going to see some of that in Europe as well. In the US, we see the capacity declining again. The leadership of several airlines is optimistic. I think they're a little too optimistic, at least for the next 3 to 5 months. It's going to be a very difficult period. Winter is typically, Addison, you track this more than I do. Winter is usually a pretty difficult period for airlines. Again, not necessarily baseless decision from the private government, but poor consultation with stakeholder is going to have consequences. So, travel airlines, the ones that ferry people to sunny destinations, are at risk, or certainly are going to have a very difficult winter.
The key for me here is the the airline failures and the speed of the economic recovery are all driven by how quickly can you get people vaccinated.
Absolutely. And so
And-
far,
and that's
with
been
the exception of Israel and with the exception of the UK
It's
and
pathetic.
perhaps another country, it's rather, I wouldn't call it pathetic because I think they're trying their best, but it's disappointing.
I think that what one could say that everybody knew a vaccine was coming. We knew this was going to
Vaccines,
happen.
yes, yeah.
We knew this was going to happen. How come there was no planning for when the vaccine comes? Here's how we are going to roll it out. Here's what we were going to do. I don't know.
Well, I think this is opening Pandora's box, and we can talk about France and why they did this and why they did that. We could talk about Canada, which is no better and probably worse. But look, the Chinese have been rolling out the vaccines. We can have our own concern, although I think they're unjustified about the quality of the Chinese vaccines. But they're processing a lot of people. Of course, they process their military and essential workers first, but things are rolling pretty quickly. Remember, they have a 1.2 billion people to vaccinate eventually. That is tremendous.
And you look at what happened in the US, the shining example is West Virginia. They rolled out the National Guard to help with this. And okay, so it's a smaller population, but they got the job done and they're moving.
But the military, Addison, you make a really good point here. The military is the unifying federal system in the United States. Okay, the military is the group of individuals that you can rely on to implement something like this. When you look at a country like Israel, with what I call a high resiliency country, which is built around, survival, being resilient, you see results are being implemented based on technology availability and based on a mindset that really get what people need as quickly as possible.
Okay.
I think also we've seen a substantial number of people in the U.S. and some of the Western countries who are either anti-vax or aren't convinced of the quality of the vaccine or the safety of the vaccine and are refusing initially. So I think we've seen a higher refusal rate than people would like to see as well. Yet where there are implementations, we see long lines and we see ineptitude in terms of getting this into operations, and that blame has to fall squarely on the government entities that are trying to put it together and just haven't gotten the job done.
We could put a long list of vaccines that have saved millions, if not billions, of lives for the past 50 years, Ernie. I mean, that's the best response. I mean, the list is very long.
There's no question. I'm just saying that there are a lot of people who have questioned it and are responding to surveys saying, no, we don't plan to be vaccinated. So that could throw a wrench in the works as well down the road for herd immunity.
Mm-hmm. To prevent us getting stuck, here's the next slide.
Ramp up and realistic. I mean, that goes together with the concern that have been expressed for quite some time, even before the pandemic. If you remember, the rate ramp ups at Airbus and Boeing were causing a few, headache to the supply chain, and they're even more relevant right now. So I think there is a sentiment that some of the OEMs are not communicating properly, or realistically rather, with their supply chain. Remember, the suppliers are trying to make sure that they protect their workforce, they protect their productive capacity, and they protect their assets. And they also meet the requirements of the OEMs. I would say right now, it is the supply chain that is in the driver's seat. It is not the OEM. I'm all in favor of that, because OEMs will tend to perhaps be a little too optimistic. I'd rather seen some productive capacity issues than too many aircraft hitting the markets again come the summer.
I think one of the problems that we've seen throughout the industry is when Boeing and Airbus were both forecasting the 60 and potentially moving up to 70 over the longer term rates for narrow bodies per month. The supply chain was forced to invest in a new capacity, and suddenly between the Max crisis and then COVID. The rug has been pulled out from under these guys, and they've suddenly got this new facility or increased capacity that they really don't need and can't use for the foreseeable future. And that's caused a tremendous financial hardship that leads to potential Chapter 11s or potential consolidation among the supply chain. And I think many of the smaller suppliers and the SMEs are looking at this and saying our very survival is at risk, and that hasn't endeared the OEMs to them, given the poor communication and rate ramp ups that just simply haven't occurred.
All right, yes, talking about supply chain.
And here we are. I think in the supply
yeah.
chain risks, the rise in Chapter 11s, 47%. The people are fearful that they're not going to survive this, because it doesn't look like the rate ramp up is going to happen, even to the expectations that Airbus and Boeing have published. They've got excess inventories, and they're looking at consolidation as a potential way out. But in the interim, they've got employees that they can't maintain on their payroll, and the loss of skilled employees is also a critical issue. So all of these coalesce in the supply chain as a very serious set of risks.
Yeah, I agree with Ernie. The key risk that I see here is primarily Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Primary concern for me is the 737, the Boeing supply chain in particular. 737 supply chain got hit 2 years ago. It's got worse during the pandemic. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic a tone, but we're going to see in the Puget Sound, we're going to see in Kansas, we're going to see a continuation of a very negative sentiment among suppliers. We're going to see some failures in Puget Sound. I can think of 3, 4, 5 companies that are really ready to lay off, or are going to lay off in significant numbers, exceeding total maybe thousands of jobs are going to go. So I'm really concerned about the situation with the Puget Sound 737 cluster in particular. Loss of skilled employees is an issue. The key problem that we're going to face is how concentrated the skill sets are in the 55 to 60 plus year old, employee category. We're seeing this at de Havilland, Canada, with the Dash 8 Q400. We see this in some other areas on the 737 supply chain. Once you turn off those programs, once you turn off those companies and those employees, they don't come back. They don't come back. So how do you compensate? How do you remedy to loss of skill set? It's going to be a big issue.
Okay, gentlemen, to cut to the chase, so to speak, and so that we don't lose the audience because so much data and so much thinking. Here's our last chart.
It's not good.
It's not good.
Yeah. I mean, it's normal. It's normal, I think, for respondents to feel that way. It is, I think, a reflection. You got to look at almost the psychology here. At the time we did that survey, there's a lot of uncertainty. Most of our respondents are from North America, I believe. There's a lot of uncertainty with the economies, a lot of uncertainty with the politics in America, or absence of, consensus and all these things.
Absence of clarity,
absence of, brain as well occasionally. But the issue that we're facing here is that we're not capturing in this survey, and that's completely understandable and normal. We're not capturing the evolving thinking mindset of the work of the sector, and that's going to get better, hopefully. And as we vaccinate people, as we see the contamination rates coming down, as we have a better idea of what President Biden is going to do with the economy. There's still some uncertainty with Biden about corporate tax, if he's going to be influenced by the loony left, or is he going to be influenced by his more rational economic advisors. There's a lot of uncertainty about Biden. we think we know where it's going, but until we've seen the product, we don't know for sure. So at the end of the day, deteriorating, yes, but I think stagnant is going to be, by the summer, stagnant to recovering is going to be the prevailing sentiment. And when you total the two, stagnant recovery, you see it's the majority. But I think we're going to see clearly a shift towards the stagnant recovery when we do the survey again in the summer, late summer.
Right.
I agree. I think we're going to see a shift in this as we move forward. But as a snapshot right now going in, people are pessimistic. People are uncertain about what's going to happen. And given the slow roll of the vaccines, I think there's still some uncertainty on with people in early January here. But but the outlook will get better, and we're expecting this outlook to improve by the end of the year.
Yeah, there was no surprise here for me. To a degree, it's how we feel as well. I think we're all looking forward to the possibility of having the Paris Air Show this year. That was a major disappointment, but it looks like I'm gonna have to be a little bit more patient and carry on.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.